The Detroit Pistons, after losing 24 straight games, were handed a win on a silver platter, and they still managed to lose. Hello everybody, welcome to Oscar Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm. So on top of talking about the Pistons and the Jazz, I'm also going to talk about the Bulls versus Spurs game, the Bulls in general, as well as some more update on like Wemby and how the Spurs are using him in the offense. And I also want to talk about this Becky Hammond, Jalen Brunson stuff that people were discussing on Twitter. I've been doing videos with like a couple of subjects in one lately, and I think we're going to make that more common than not, just because you guys seem to enjoy them and the extra watch time's nice. But with that said, we're going to talk about this Jazz versus Pistons game, not a game that you would typically expect to tune into. However, for me, this is basically like Game 7 of the NBA Finals, because it seemed like now, finally, the Pistons would have a chance to destroy an NBA team. Not even destroy them, or at least just actually get a win. Just a W on the column, not an L after L after L after L after L after L. But no, they lost again, making it, 26 straight, I think it is, 25 straight. They're on their way towards the record for most consecutive losses in the NBA. I honestly think they might be on pace for the worst record in NBA history. I believe it's the Bobcats and like 09 or 08, around then, or in that ballpark of time. They won like 7 games. I think this Pistons team could be that bad. I think, at least for me, it's the worst NBA team that I have seen since I started covering the NBA, which was in 2016. So ever since that time in NBA history, there hasn't been an NBA team worse than this. And the thing that's a little bit, truly perplexing about this Pistons team is there is some talent here. It's not like, I guess just with the way the NBA is now, it's pretty impossible not to have a decent level of talent to some degree. But like, there's still ultimately like maybe 4.5 NBA players on this Pistons team. Those being, I'll say 5, because I think Jaden Ivey is definitely an NBA player, even though he doesn't play enough. But Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren, and pretty much the only dudes that I think Marcus Sasser has moments where he definitely seems like he can be an NBA player. And Alec Burks has been in the past, however, he has not been good this year. So yeah, the roster is pretty freaking rough, but the Utah Jazz were missing Lauri Markkanen, what's the name of the young guard, Keontae George, Taylor Horton-Tucker, and then like a bunch of other players as well. So like, even though they were thin, they were even thin for the players that you would play when you're thin. And yet the Jazz managed to be just a better basketball team. I will give a little bit of credit to the Pistons, even though it feels like they don't deserve it even a little bit. But I will just say, I do think this Jazz roster without Markkanen against a team like the Pistons is close enough to not garbage or not complete total wash, just get stomped on, that I'm not like surprised necessarily. A lot of people were like, even the Pistons are guaranteed to beat this roster. But like Colin Sexton, for example, he averaged like 25 points per game before this game since becoming a starter. Chris Dunn, I think, can be a good NBA point guard, a backup, no doubt, but he had a double-double on this one, or a near double-double. I know he had 9 assists late. I don't know if he ever got the 10th one, but he had some clutch shots as well, a couple of short floaters. You have Walker Kessler, you had John Collins, you had Kelly Olynyk. There were real NBA players with, good amounts of history behind them. So I'm not necessarily surprised, but at the same time, do you have no pride at all that you couldn't lock in and go in for real in this game? Like, straight up, I say that I watched this game like it was Game 7 of the Finals, but I feel like if I was a player on that Pistons roster, after all the losses we just had and knowing how much of a cupcake matchup we have coming up, that like, I'm making sure a win happens. But I guess not, because this team doesn't play with any level of pride, any level of, I feel like it's impossible to play with pride if you've lost this much, because what would you have to be prideful for? But like, they don't even really care about being embarrassed anymore, because they're just embarrassed to a degree you can't really come back from. So as for what needs to happen to fix this, I think they need to have the team sold. I think front office change is probably necessary, even if, they've done a decent job at accumulating talent at points, but they haven't actually done anything towards building a good culture for a franchise, putting a team in the right direction. This is Cade Cunningham's third season, and you've only gotten worse since getting him. That's not the direction you want to go in, I can tell you that much. I don't think they've done enough to earn that position. Still, I would say. This 26 game losing streak is just unacceptable. And I know that we have tanking in the NBA and people are generally more cool with it than they used to be in the past, but you don't want to be this embarrassingly bad. No matter how high of a draft pick it gets you, you don't want to be this bad. You don't want to be remembered as one of the worst teams in NBA history, and they are well on their way towards that. With that said, I'm going to move on to the Chicago Bulls versus Spurs game because the Bulls have won 8 of their last 11. I understand that the Spurs are not necessarily the most impressive opponent. In fact, a lot of the discourse has been revolving around this game has been about how unimpressive they are, specifically because of how poorly they utilized Victor Wembanyama. Stacey King, when he was calling the game, was actually pointing out the many opportunities that were regularly missed by the Spurs on offense to get a bucket for Victor Wembanyama. And this is something I've complained about time and time again, and somehow had people attempt to gaslight me into believing this is something that's even fucking remotely acceptable. And it's absolutely not. I don't care if you're tanking. Again, this is the same argument I would do with the Pistons. You do not want to be this embarrassingly bad, and you do not want to end up in games where your number 1 overall pick is scoring 7 points because his teammates don't know how to fucking find him. Either they don't know how to find him, or they seem to have some weird vendetta. Stacey on the call, I'll tell you, I'll be the first to tell you that Stacey King often has bad takes. It's why I'm honestly not as big of a fan of him as a lot of people are and expect you to be if you're a Chicago Bulls fan, because while he's really good at color commentary in terms of actually making basketball points, very often he's just old-headed and just doesn't bring a perspective to the game that I think is particularly helpful. But in this case, he was absolutely right. And he said something along the lines of, it seems like the players on this Spurs team are looking around being like, maybe I can be the number 1 option. Maybe I'm that go-to guy. I hate to break the news to you, but Victor Wembanyama is that guy. You got to fall in line behind him. And they don't seem to understand that. The offensive scheme definitely doesn't seem to understand that. And I realize that a lot of this can be blamed on Greg Popovich, but it also seems to be the personality of the players on this team. The only player that I've seen not really have any issue getting Wemby the ball when he needs it and in the right position has been essentially Devin Vassell and Trey Jones. After that, truly comical how often the guy is missed in the most opportune positions to score. Victor is not a complete product by any means. There's a lot of things he needs to add to his offensive game to be as good as he can eventually be, as we all know. So I'm not going to sit here and act like there's just some superstar that's otherwise being utilized like a role player and thus not being as good as he could possibly be, but there are things about Victor to him right now that offensively speaking, you should easily be able to crack 20 points per game with him efficiently at that, and that's not happening. The guy is just ridiculous around the rim, and you can throw passes to him that nobody else can get to. He can go for layups and angles and speeds that nobody else is capable of, and you're just not taking advantage of that ability even in the slightest. It doesn't make sense, and it's not good for Victor's development. I don't get why people are acting like Jeremy Sohan's fucking development is something that should be prioritized over their number 1 overall pick, but it shouldn't be. I don't think Jeremy Sohan's going to be a very good NBA player, period, so you really shouldn't be investing that much in him anyways, but you especially shouldn't be doing it at the detriment of a generational prospect. Wemby's going to figure it out. It's going to be fine, and a year or 2 down the line, hopefully sooner rather than later, he's going to be in a context where he's just fine, but this is going to be a problem that it took this long. It's going to it's delaying the progress that could very easily be there. It's delaying setting up the foundations of your franchise going forward. And it's just fucking frustrating. It's just a bad product. It's really difficult to watch. And I wanted to watch a lot of Victor Wembanyama this year. And as the season's gone along, I have watched the Spurs less and less and less because they drive me up the fucking wall. Anyways, with that said, the last thing I want to talk about, Becky Hammond, I think she is coaching in the WNBA right now, was a former assistant coach in the NBA, was on the show with Kendrick Perkins and Malika Andrews. I don't know what it's called, but she just essentially said that Jalen Brunson cannot be the championship number one option on an NBA team. And a good handful of people came after her for that. Now, I will tell you that defending her and defending this position has not been an unpopular thing to do. You know, most people realize this was just dumb people being dumb. But I still feel the need to talk about it anyways, both the specific context and why this type of thing even happens in the first place. So what she was getting at, she essentially said no one has been a small guard and been the leader of a championship team besides Steph. She also could have listed Isaiah Thomas as an example of that. I do think that the Bad Boy Pistons were a lot more of an ensemble situation than just like Isaiah Thomas being this god tier superstar player or anything like that. Definitely not in the same vein as Stephen Curry in that regard. But at least in terms of like a guard being the best player, Isaiah Thomas is also someone who's done that. And Stephen Curry is someone who's done that. But literally, that is it. Look at all of NBA history. A small guard being your first option does not win you a title. So that's just a wholly correct opinion. And unless you are suggesting that Jalen Brunson is on Stephen Curry's level, then you should have no issue with that comment. But for some reason, people jump on this, which is something that should be fairly obvious and basically common sense. So many people jumped on this and gave her shit for it. And I'm just going to be real. They did it because it's a woman saying this. And this has been a trend in the NBA space and NBA Twitter to a comical and depressing degree. The amount that just any woman says anything about anything in basketball that dares to have an opinion and express that publicly, there's just like a crowd of people ready to jump on that because she's a woman. The NBA itself has not done a great job of, respecting and upholding where women should be, regarding like Miles Bridges stuff, Josh Giddey stuff, different hirings and things like that. But where it's especially egregious is in that very toxic section of NBA Twitter. And it makes it a space that I don't even like being myself as a man. And I think it would just be an utter, disgusting, awful nightmare of a space to be if I was a woman. It's awful, and the way that people jump on women anytime they have any kind of opinion in the sports space, it's ridiculous. And I realize there's a subsection of dudes, often the same dudes, making those same unfair, misogynistic criticisms, who will say some shit like, she's not gonna fuck you, bro, or whatever the hell. But I don't fucking care. It's what's right. And you're just an asshole on the internet with, NBA player profile. Grow up, for real. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say on that matter. But that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.